Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It crept down from the northern rims as a smudge at the edge of the world, a gray thumbprint on the sky that pressed wider and darker by the hour until the sun itself seemed a rumor. By the time the first flakes fell, the wind had already sharpened. By the time the flakes turned to sheets, Deadwood Crossing had barred its shutters and let its chimneys talk. Mary Ellen was still outside. She'd been sent with a heel of bread and a crock of broth. To the livery, a kindness from Patch the saloon cook to anyone that needs warming. Patch had a habit of giving her errands the way other men gave nickels to a church plate, with a gruffness that tried to hide gentleness. "Go on, Sprite," he told her, nudging her into the whitening street, "and back quick. That sky's got me remembering blizzards I ain't even lived through yet." Mary Ellen had pulled her shawl tight and walked fast, boots squeaking in new snow. At the livery, she'd left the crock in the hands of old Cray, whose cough sounded like a shovel. In gravel. She'd turned for home, though home meant the lean-to, behind the cooper's shop where the rain leaked and the wind talked through the boards, only to discover that the town she knew had been erased and replaced with the inside of a cloud. Buildings that should have been right there had drifted backward, smudged into grayness. The street became a guess. Her own breath, blown back into her face, felt like a stranger's. She went by feel, fence post to fence post, hand to splintered wood, counting steps like prayers. 60 to the well, she told herself, voice small in the roar. 80 to the Coopers. Don't stop at 60, don't stop. She'd learned to keep numbers in her mouth when the world threatened. To go faceless. Numbers made edges. Numbers kept people alive. The wind unstitched those edges anyway. It climbed into her shawl, got its teeth in the weave. It pushed up her sleeves and down her boots and made her fingers ache like they'd been slammed in a door. The flakes stung hard enough to feel like sand. More than once she put her back to a building to breathe and couldn't tell if she faced brick or open air. 61, 62. She stepped, sank, and nearly went to her knees. The drift had a crust that broke under her small weight. She flailed forward, palms burning, and smacked into something that felt like a hitching post. It wasn't. It was an upright limb of willow sticking out of the world the way a finger sticks up from a grave. That frightened her in a way the cold hadn't. She laughed once to scare off the fear and kept moving. The sound came through the wind like a thread through cloth thin, but strong enough to catch. She stopped. The storm hustled past her, shouldering her like a rude man at a bar, and in the moment after its shove, she heard it again. A cry. Not wind, not a fox. Human and small. "Hello?" she called. The word died in front of her, too heavy to lift. She swallowed and yelled louder. "Hello!" "Hey!" The cry answered, strangled and shorter now, as if whoever made it had to cut it free from something tight. She turned toward it, and the wind knifed at her eyes. She pulled her shawl up, looked down, and saw the snow wasn't level but pocked small. Dips where the wind eddied, a long hump. And beside the hump, a dark slit like a coin slot. Mary Ellen fell to her knees and dug with her whole hands. She found hair first braided, stiff with ice. Then a forehead, nose, mouth. Lips that looked bruised berries blue. Eyes closed. "Oh," she said, because it was the only word she had left. Oh, no, no, no. The child was small, light enough, that the snow and the wind together had nearly carried him away. He couldn't be more than 5. The braids told her what his beaded necklace would have told her had it not been tucked under his shirt. Lakota. She had seen Lakota boys before, riding Pony Bear and laughing in summer, far off along the hills north of town. She had never touched one. She did now. She shook him as gently as she could, then rougher when gentleness didn't bring him back. His lashes twitched. His lips moved and made another sound, the thready cry, but this time almost a word. "It's all right," she lied. "It's all right. I've got you." Mary Ellen pulled him free. Snow came with him in clumps like packed flour. His small hands were so cold they felt soft. She wrapped him in her shawl, tucking it up over his head. Wind bit through the thin wool and into her dress and skin, as if she had set herself on fire to warm him. She thought of Patch's big hands sliding the crock toward old Cray, a motion like blessing, and of her mother's hands, months and months gone now, patting a quilt flat over a bed she would never sleep in again. She set her jaw. "Can you walk?" she asked. It was a silly question. The boy's knees knocked together without bending. She got her arm under his legs and the other under his back and lifted. He weighed less than the crock of broth had. She had to carry him the way she had carried wood, close to her body, balanced against bone. "Count," she told herself. "Count and step." The storm got worse, because storms always get worse when you need them not to. But Mary Ellen had grown up in the sort of pour that makes you strong as an old nail. She turned her shoulder to the wind and walked. She kept her nose down to keep it from going numb. She breathed hot breath into the shawl around his face, so his skin felt something other than ice. When she had breath to spare, she talked into the shawl too. Foolish things. How many chickens Patch could pluck in a minute? The names of the Coopers. 3 cats, the way a penny tastes if you put it in your mouth. Words, like breath, can warm a little. The boy said something after a time. It cracked like a seed opening. She didn't know it. It was a syllable soft as bread inside the crust. "What's that?" she asked, not because he would answer, his eyes were barely slits, but because hearing him try to say anything made her want to tell him yes. Say it again. "You can call me Mary, or just girl, or hey. I'll answer to hey." She walked until walking was what she was. The plains went flat and then tilted down toward the river. The snow there didn't pile. In drifts, it ran like fine white sand toward the cutbanks. She peered through the glare of blown things and thought she saw a shape squared against the wind, a low rectangle, dark at the corners, sunk into the earth. The sod hut had been abandoned a summer ago, when the man who built it had decided he was more miner than farmer and more fool than both. He'd gone west toward the Black Hills with a pick and a pocket Bible and never came back. The hut remained because sod does. A roof of roots and dirt, walls grown from prairie as much as laid by hand. The door hung askew. Snow had written itself. Across the threshold, Mary Ellen stumbled the last yards, kicked the door aside, and pushed her body and the boys into the dark dot. It was not warm. But it was not wind dot. She set him down on the packed earth floor and found the hearth by smell and touch, a place that remembered fire. She had 2 lucifer matches in a paper safe in the pocket of her dress. She had guarded them since summer, like they were the last 2 friends she was allowed. She pulled one free with her teeth and struck it on a stone. The first match sputtered and went black, a dead star in her fingers. The second took. The flame was so small it hurt to look at, the way looking at hope can hurt. She fed it shaved slivers. From a broken crate, then a splinter, then a thumb-thick stick scavenged from rafters that had crumbled anyway. Smoke crawled up the chimney hole, as if remembering the way. When the wood caught and widened to a tongue of yellow, the hut changed shape. She could see the boy clearly now. A narrow face, skin more gray than brown with cold, braids stiff as rope, a beaded charm on his necklace shaped like a leaf. Asterisk, his lips were still blue. Blue is a color you cannot bear to see on a child's mouth. Mary Ellen slid her hands under him and rolled him near the fire. Not so near he'd burn, near enough for air to move between his skin and heat. She stripped off his wet outer shirt, rubbed his arms with the heel of her palm until her hands burned. She remembered the way Patch heated stones at the edge of his stove to keep loaves rising when the saloon was drafty. She pushed 2 flattish rocks into the fire, and when they were warm, wrapped them in the scraps of her shawl and tucked one at his feet, one under his ribs. His eyes opened to slits, and he flinched a small, surprised animal. She lifted her, hands, palms out. She said, "It's me." "It's no, you don't know me. I'm Mary. I found you. You were almost—" She stopped herself just before gone. "I found you." He said the syllable again, slower. It came out of him like something learned long ago. "I don't know that word," she admitted, "but it sounds like a good one." She. Melted snow in a tin cup she found on the hearth, waiting for it to stop biting and start warming. She tipped it to his mouth, and he swallowed as if swallowing hurt. She broke the heel of bread she'd kept tucked in her bodice, a piece reserved for herself, for later, and softened it in the cup so he wouldn't have to chew. He ate the wet crumbs with a seriousness that made tears jump into her throat. She swallowed them back. Tears freeze fast. You don't waste heat on them. The wind shoved at the door, offended to be left outside. Snow sifted under it like flour. The hut creaked the way an old man does when he stands. Mary Ellen fed in more wood, listened to the fire talk in snaps and whispers, and murmured to the boy whenever the quiet between crackles felt too big. "What should I call you?" she asked. "I can't keep saying boy to you. That's rude. Patch calls me Sprite when he's being nice and Rat when he's not, but Mary is what my mama gave me." "Did your mama give you a name like the way sun gives light?" "I bet she did." He blinked. His eyes had warmed toward brown. He touched the bead on his necklace with clumsy fingers, and then his chest, right above the leaf, as if showing her where he kept something. "All right," she said softly. "Then I'll call you. I'll call you Leaf until I learn better. Is that foolish?" "It is foolish. But names hold a person in place." She tapped the packed earth beneath him. "See? Like pegs in a tent. We'll peg you right here until the cold forgets you." Thunder that wasn't thunder rolled over the roof-whined rivers colliding. Somewhere far off, a coyote tossed its thin voice into the white. Mary Ellen added more wood. The boy dozed and jerked and dozed again. She took off her boots and rubbed her own toes until the sting meant blood was paying attention again. She turned her stockings so the less wet sides faced her skin. She wrapped the torn remains of her shawl around the boy, and then, because her back shivered like a seizure, she pulled a rotting buffalo hide from the corner and shook out the mice and laid it over both of them, edging closer not to touch him. With cold, but to let the heat from her belly bleed into his back. The fire burned low. She leaned close and blew in its ember heart, not hard enough to scatter, long enough to coax. Flame brightened, sighed, and ate. Her head nodded once, twice. She bit the inside of her cheek to stay awake. The old-timer who'd built this hut had scratched a mark in the hearthstone, one notch for each winter, perhaps. There were 5 notches. Her parents had gotten 5 winters together after she was born, and then a 6th had come with fever. She thought of her mama's arm around her on a night when hail had hammered the roof, and her mama said, "Hush, now. Storms don't last. People do." It had turned out not to be true in the way Mary Ellen understood true. But sometimes words were meant to make courage, not facts. She took the boy's hand. It lay in hers like a small bird that had chosen to rest. "You sleep," she told him. "I'll keep the fire fat." She lifted their joined hands and blew. On his fingers. "You're not going to die." That's a thing I'm saying, like a prayer and a threat both. The wind slacked by inches, so small they could have been imagined. The door stopped its angry rattling and went to sulking. Somewhere above them, a rafter gave up a low sigh. Heat built up in the mud of the walls and made the air smell like damp dirt at the edge of a garden. Mary Ellen dreamed with her eyes open, of summer grass tall as her shoulders, of a river that moved slow as honey, of faces that had left and faces she had not met yet. She startled awake from one of those not quite dreams to the boy, watching her with the sort of grave attention only very young and very old people own. He said the word again clearer now, shaped with the care a carpenter gives a joint. It wasn't English. It was a round sound, a seed sound. It pressed into the air between them and stayed there. "I don't know it," Mary Ellen whispered, "but I think I know what you mean." He touched his chest, then hers, then the warm stones tucked in the shawl, then the fire. He said it once more and let his eyes fall closed, lashes on his face like ink strokes. She sat a while longer, listening to the quiet and the small sounds all quiet contains, the pop of sap, the shift of snow on the roof, the slow, even breathing of the boy, as she realized with a start her own. When she finally allowed her body to tip down, she did it with the care of setting a cup on a table that wobbles. She lay on her side, with the buffalo hide over both of them, and watched the fire make its red cave. Dawn came as a paleness that could have been the storm resting or the world starting over. It opened like a knife cut in the east. Mary Ellen felt it before she saw it, a loosening. She pushed herself up and peered around the char of her lashes. The door glow had changed from blue to something kinder. She put her hand on the boy's cheek. It was no longer a winter stone. It was what a cheek is supposed to be. Warm, a little. Damp with sleep, full of something still going. He woke when she tried to pull the shawl straighter. He blinked at her and said the word a fourth time, almost smiling, as if to tell her she was doing a thing right, even if she didn't know its name. "All right, then," she said, a laugh catching in her throat. "If that word means what I think it means, say it again." He did. And though no one had yet taught Mary Ellen the tongue of his people, the way he set the sound down between them made a meaning she could carry without translation. Later that morning, with the sky clear and cold enough to ring, she eased the yell. Door open and squinted toward the river. The ice lay under sugar snow, the banks folded white. The world that had tried to eat them had spit them out. She turned back to the boy, to the fire, to the little tin cup. Her stomach gnawed. She tore the last shred of bread into halves no one else would have bothered to make. She gave the larger one to him, the smaller to herself, and smiled because she had something more useful than bread inside her now. "Life," she said softly, tasting the syllable in English. "That's the word you've been telling me, isn't it?" The boy's smile made his whole face a daybreak. Behind them, beyond the door and the hut and the river, the world had also heard a word and was moving toward them in answer. But for that 1 hour, in a room made of earth and heat and breath, the storm ended with a child's whisper and a girl's promise, and the day began. The river lay hushed beneath its coat of ice, winding like a great white serpent through the Dakota plains. Snow sparkled on its frozen back, broken only where the current gurgled and pressed against weak spots, keeping a few black pools alive. Mary Ellen stood in the doorway of the sod hut, the ragged buffalo hide clutched around her shoulders. Her breath rose in clouds and clung to her lashes as frost. Behind her, the Lakota boy slept, chest rising steady now, lips pink instead of blue. She had hardly dared close her eyes through the night, afraid that if she let go of the fire, or of him, death would creep back in. But he had lived. That was enough. She turned her gaze outward. A sound carried faintly across the plain. At first it seemed only the creak of ice shifting, but it grew into something more drums in the earth, not of wood and hide, but of hooves. Mary Ellen's stomach tightened. On the far ridge, where the snow thinned and the sky lowered itself, shadows appeared. They came in twos, then tens, then hundreds. Ponies descended the slope, their manes whipped with frost, their riders wrapped in robes of buffalo hide, feathers lifting in the wind. The sun had barely risen, but the ridge seemed crowned with movement. She had never seen so many riders. The town sometimes whispered about raiding parties in numbers of 50, maybe 100. But this was an army. Her first instinct was to duck back inside the hut, to press herself into the shadows. Yet the boy lay there. They were his people. She could not hide him, and she had no right to. Her hands trembled, but she stayed where she was, framed in the crooked doorway, with the river behind her like a strip of hammered steel. The warriors came down in silence, save for the muffled thud of hooves. They gathered along the riverbank, row after row, until the white expanse seemed rimmed by dark figures. Mary Ellen's knees nearly gave out at the sight. 500, perhaps more. Each carried the dignity of ceremony, faces painted with ochre, some with eagle feathers fixed in their hair, others bearing shields marked with suns and bison. Lances tipped with iron caught the weak sun and flared like cold fire dot at their center. Rode one figure taller than the rest, his robe edged in quills, his face marked with lines of red and black. He guided his horse to the front and looked toward the hut, his eyes fixed on Mary Ellen. She did not need to be told who he was. This was the chief. Her throat locked. She half turned and glanced inside. The boy had stirred awake, blinking at the noise. When he saw the gathering outside, his lips parted in a faint sound, something like relief. He tried to rise, but his limbs shook too hard. He pointed to the doorway, to the warriors. Mary Ellen nodded. "They've come for you," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the words. She stepped aside. The chief dismounted with the weight of a man who carried a whole people on his back. His boots sank into the snow as he strode toward the hut. The warriors behind him remained still as statues, though their ponies snorted and shifted in the cold. When he reached the door, Mary Ellen backed away, bowing her head without knowing why, perhaps from fear, perhaps from reverence. The boy lifted his arm toward the man. "Father," he breathed in Lakota. The chief's face softened, his stern lines breaking into something Mary Ellen had not expected. He knelt and gathered the boy into his arms, pressing him against his chest as though to assure himself he was not merely snow and shadow. He murmured words in a low voice, the language of family, not of command. Mary Ellen watched, suddenly feeling more orphaned than ever. She had delivered the boy back into warmth and belonging, while she remained only the stray girl with no kin waiting for her. The chief turned at last. His eyes, dark and searching, fell upon her. He said something sharp and guttural to the warriors. Behind him, they shifted, murmuring, a sound like a wave of discontent moving through reeds. Mary Ellen's heart hammered. She understood nothing of the words, but the tone told enough: suspicion, mistrust. She had heard the stories in town how the Lakota spoke of settlers as thieves and trespassers, just as the settlers told tales of ambush and bloodshed. Here she stood, a girl of the townsfolk, holding their chief's child after a night alone. What else could they think? The chief raised a hand, silencing the murmur. He looked at her again, this time with something unreadable. He set the boy gently down on his feet and gestured toward her. The boy, unsteady but determined, crossed the short distance and seized Mary Ellen's hand. His small fingers gripped hers tightly as he looked up at his father and said a word she did not know, repeating it until the sound grew strong. Mary Ellen's cheeks burned. She looked down at their joined hands, then back at the circle of riders. She wanted to explain, to tell them about the storm, the snow, the way she had carried him in her arms. But words tangled in her throat. and even if they came free, they would not be understood. Still, the boy's father seemed to understand. He studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head in the faintest bow. The gesture was not small. Behind him, the riverbank shifted with whispers. The tension loosened slightly, but not entirely. Warriors still watched her with narrowed eyes, hands close to their weapons. Gratitude could live beside suspicion. Mary Ellen swallowed hard. For the first time since the blizzard, she felt how alone she truly was. Alone between two worlds, one that had cast her to scraps, and one that had not yet decided what to make of her. As the sun climbed higher, the warriors began to dismount, kindling fires along the riverbank. Smoke rose in long, gray banners, curling against the pale sky. Songs began, low and steady, the kind sung at gatherings to tell of survival and return. Mary Ellen stood outside the hut, the boy still holding her hand, listening to voices that did not belong to her, but surrounded her all the same. She did not know if she was safe. She did not know if she was welcomed out, but for the moment she was not invisible. And that, to a little orphan who had lived too long in shadows, felt almost like belonging. The sun climbed slow, as if reluctant to shine on what had gathered at the river. A thin gold rim crept across the ice, setting the frost to glitter, but the cold did not retreat. Warriors crowded the bank in rows of smoke and fire, their ponies tethered to willow stakes, their voices threading the morning with a mixture of song and counsel. Mary Ellen sat at the edge of one fire, uncertain if she had been placed there or if she had wandered there herself. The Lakota boy, whom she had begun to think of as Leaf, for the bead he had touched, sat close beside her. He leaned into her shoulder whenever the smoke grew thick, and though he said little, he would not let her drift more than an arm's length away. The chief, Iron Elk, had summoned elders to his side. They sat on robes of buffalo hide, their hair streaked with gray, their eyes sharp with the long memory of men who had lived through raids and treaties alike. The younger warriors gathered in knots, voices quick and angry. From their glances, sharp as thrown knives, Mary Ellen knew they spoke of her. She bent her head and clasped her hands, trying to appear smaller than she already was. The fire hissed as snowmelt dripped into it. One of the young warriors broke from the circle and strode toward her. His chest was painted with zigzags of white and black, his hair stiff with grease and feathers. He stopped a few paces away, pointed at her, and let loose a string of words in Lakota, fast and biting. Though Mary Ellen could not understand, she caught the meaning well enough. His hand slashed across his throat. His eyes glittered with contempt. Leaf bolted upright and shouted something back, his voice high but fierce. He clutched Mary Ellen's arm, as if to prove she was no enemy. The warrior snarled. His hand went to the haft of his tomahawk. Mary Ellen froze. Her stomach clenched so tight she thought she might be sick. All she could think to do was raise her empty palms toward him, like she'd once seen a preacher do in a camp meeting, to show she carried no harm. Before the warrior could step closer, a shadow fell across the fire. Iron Elk. The chief's presence silenced the argument like a storm, swallowing wind. His robe swept the snow as he planted himself between Mary Ellen and the young man. His voice, deep and commanding, rolled out in words that made the warrior flinch. The chief pointed first to Leaf, then to Mary Ellen, then toward the memory of the blizzard still lingering on the hills. The warrior protested, his tone sharp but faltering. Then Iron Elk struck the butt of his lance into the frozen ground. The sound cracked like thunder. The young man lowered his eyes, stiffened, and retreated to the edge of the circle, muttering. Mary Ellen let out a breath she had been holding too long. Iron Elk turned his gaze to her. He crouched so that their eyes met. His face was hard, but not cruel. He studied her as though weighing her on a scale invisible to her. Then, slowly, he spoke in English, his accent heavy, but clear enough to understand. "You save my son." Mary Ellen swallowed, throat dry. I found him in the storm." "He would have," she broke off, unable to say died. "I just did what I could." The chief's eyes did not soften, but they did not accuse her either. He gave a single nod, a gesture that seemed to hold more weight than any sentence, slipped from Mary Ellen's side, and nestled against his father, chattering in Lakota, pointing back at her. The boy's face glowed with the sort of light only children could summon, a certainty that gratitude was stronger than suspicion. Iron. Elk listened. His expression shifted in small ways. A lift of a brow, the faintest crease at the corner of his mouth. He pulled the boy into his lap, then looked once more at Mary Ellen. "Child of town," he said. "No mother, no father." Mary Ellen blinked. She had not told him this. She wondered if Leif had spoken of her through gestures in the night, or if the chief simply knew how to read her thinness, her wary eyes, the way no one stood at her side. "Yes," she whispered. "No mother, no father." The chief tilted his head, considering. Then he rose and returned to the council of elders. For the rest of the day, Mary Ellen remained at the fire while the Lakota camp pulsed with life around her. Women moved among the warriors, bringing broth that steamed in the bitter air. Children, their cheeks red with cold, played along the riverbank, throwing sticks onto the ice and daring each other to fetch them. Drums sounded now and again, low and steady, echoing off the hills. No one came too near her, but no one drove her away either. She belonged to the circle, and yet stood apart. As the sky dimmed and stars began to prick the velvet dark. Iron Elk rose again. He called out in his tongue, and silence fell. Warriors turned their eyes toward him, the fires painting their faces in flickers of red and gold. He lifted Leif onto his shoulders. The boy's voice rang out clear, high, insistent. He spoke Mary Ellen's name, or something like it, woven into words she could not understand. He pointed toward her with both hands, smiling as if he had won some great victory. The warriors stirred, some frowning, some nodding reluctantly. Murmurs rose, but none dared contradict the boy's father. Iron Elk lowered his son, then raised his hand to the sky. His words carried across the river, solemn and heavy. Mary Ellen did not need to understand them to know what they meant. He was declaring, before all, that she had given life back to his child, and for that she would not be harmed. Mary Ellen's chest loosened. Her eyes stung. She had lived so long invisible, unwanted, half-starved in alleys and back doors. Now 500 eyes watched her, and though most still judged her, she had been named aloud as someone who mattered. That night they gave her a place by the fire. They draped a robe of rabbit fur over her shoulders. Leif curled against her, sighed as he drifted to sleep. The drums beat low, the stars spread wider, and Mary Ellen sat awake, caught between fear and wonder. She had carried a child out of a storm and into life. Now the storm had carried her into a world she had never known, a world that did not fully accept her, but would not forget her either. For the first time in all her 12 years, she felt the stirrings of something she had never dared to name. Not safety, not belonging, but the beginning of both. Morning rose slow and pale, like a candle lit behind frosted glass. The smoke from the Lakota campfires lifted in thin blue streams, curling against the sky. Ponies stamped their hooves on the snow, snorting clouds of steam, eager to move. Mary Ellen woke to the weight of a fur robe on her shoulders, and the steady warmth of the boy Leif nestled against her side. For a moment she forgot where she was, expecting to hear the banging of Patch's saloon pans or the rattle of the coopers. Mallets, But when she blinked, she saw the wide circle of Tippis and the long riverbank crowded with warriors, and the memory of the night before returned. A woman approached, her braids tied with strips of red cloth. She crouched and placed a wooden bowl. Into Mary Ellen's hands broth, rich with the taste of bison and roots, steam curling in the cold air. The woman gave no words, but her eyes were kind. Mary Ellen nodded thanks, clutching the bowl as though it might vanish. She let Leaf sip first, then drank the rest herself, warmth spreading through her chest. Not long after, the camp began to stir with purpose. Warriors mounted ponies, women packed robes, children gathered wood and food. The songs of the previous night had faded, replaced by the quick rhythm of departure. This gathering had never meant to stay. Mary Ellen's heart tightened. She realized the truth before anyone spoke it. They would leave her. Iron Elk appeared among the bustle, tall and commanding, his robe trimmed with porcupine quills. Leaf ran to him, and the chief lifted his son onto a pony, as gently as a man placing a bird back into its nest. Then the chief turned to Mary Ellen. She stood awkwardly, clutching the edge of the robe they had given her, feeling smaller than ever. Walked to her and stopped close enough that she could see the fine cracks in the paint across his cheeks. For a long moment he said nothing. Then in English, slow and deliberate, he spoke. "You gave life." His voice was deep, but not harsh. He placed his hand on his chest, then pointed to her. "You have heart of," he paused, searching, "bravery." Mary Ellen swallowed, unable to answer. She wanted to say, "I only did what anyone would have done." But she knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have stopped in the storm. Not everyone would have carried a strange child through the blizzard. When her own strength barely kept her standing, Iron Elk studied her thin face, her ragged dress, her boots worn down to the stitching. He spoke again, more softly now. "You." "Alone," Mary Ellen nodded. She felt the truth of it burn in her chest. The chief's eyes lingered on her, heavy with thought. Then he reached into the pouch at his belt and drew out a small token. A piece of bone carved into the shape of a bird, tied with a strip of sinew. He placed it in her palm and folded her fingers over it. "Remember," he said, "river, snow, life." The words struck her like a brand. She nodded, gripping the token so tightly it bit into her skin. Leaf wriggled down from his pony and ran. To her, arms wrapping around her waist. He spoke quickly in Lakota, smiling through chattering teeth. Mary Ellen bent to hold him, wishing she could understand every word. But she didn't need to. The way he pressed his bead against her cheek, before running back to his father, told her everything. Iron Elk gave a final nod. Then he raised his arm, and the camp moved. One by one, then row by row, the warriors urged their ponies forward. Hooves drummed on the frozen earth. Women and children followed, sleds dragging loads of furs and meat. The riverbank filled with 500 souls began to empty, stretching into a long procession that disappeared into the horizon. Mary Ellen stood alone on the bank, the sound of hooves fading like distant thunder. She pulled the fur robe tight around her shoulders and clutched the bird token in her fist. The snow lay untouched now where the campfires had burned, as if the Lakota had never been there, except for the tracks, thousands of them pressed deep into the white. For the first time in days, she felt the silence of the plains. A silence so wide it seemed it might swallow her whole. But she was not the same girl who had left Deadwood Crossing on an errand with a scrap of bread. She was the girl who had carried a boy out of a storm. She was the girl who had stood before 500 warriors and not been broken. She looked down at the token in her hand, its bird-shaped smooth under her thumb. She whispered the word she had heard from Leaf again and again, the one she had guessed at, the one that bound them. Life. The sound drifted into the cold morning air. Mary Ellen turned then, lifting her eyes toward the distant hills where the town lay hidden. Her steps were heavy, but her heart felt strangely light. She would return to her world, to alleys and scraps, and the uncertain kindness of Patch and others. But she would carry something no storm could strip away, a memory, a promise, and the knowledge that once, for one night, she had belonged. She walked back into the snow, leaving behind her own small trail of tracks on the riverbank parallel to the great ones, but no less real.